Hello, everyone. Happy Monday. We have a day of some very challenging news, but wait, I'm going to take her out and put her back in. Today is a day of some very challenging news, but fortunately, we have a wonderful, wonderful guest to go over it with us. I couldn't be more thrilled to be bringing you today Dahlia Lithwick. I feel like she's a person who really needs no true introduction, but in case somehow you've missed it, she is the host of Slate's podcast, Amicus. She's also one of the nation's foremost legal commentators. She is a longtime Supreme Court reporter, senior editor at Slate Magazine, and importantly, the author of Lady Justice: Women, the Law, and the Battle to Save America. She's also just a wonderful person. Dahlia, thank you. Thank you for being here today.
It's so good to be with you, Jessica. That's like one of those intros my mom gives. Yeah,
Right. It's
thank you.
how I feel. I honestly I saw this news and I felt confused and I was like, I just wish Dahlia Lithwick were here to explain it. I'm like, why not just ask? So this is also a PSA for anybody. Just ask sometimes. It could work out. Thank you.
Of course.
One of the joys of being in independent media is that I can just say the real. So I just want to start. There's a slew of Supreme Court decisions today. I'd love to have you explain, but starting with this unreal decision about the FTC, I saw this and I just thought, what the F? What is this? What does it mean? Can you break this one down for us first?
Yeah, I mean, there is a long-standing tradition that the way that the federal government works is there are all these independent agencies, and they are full of experts, first of all, who often are appointed by presidents of both parties. They're carefully balanced, and that they bring this career-long expertise to the position. And the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, which was created more than 100 years ago, is one of the many, 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 many agencies that we rely upon to do really complicated regulatory work with deep expertise that, at least in theory, doesn't change every time you get a new president. But you'll have probably heard this unitary executive theory, this theory that the president has, almost boundless, capacious power to do whatever he wants, that the entirety of the executive branch serves at his pleasure. And today, the Supreme Court really ratified that by allowing him to fire, for no good reason, Rebecca Slaughter from the FTC. And it's an incredibly, your impulse is the right one, Jessica, which is this seems like an abstraction, but it is. The impulse to be completely panic stricken is also the right one, because it means that, with one caveat we'll talk about in 1 second, because the court also heard this case about Lisa Cook and the Fed. But with that carve out, it essentially means that the president can willy-nilly fire anyone he wants from any agency for any reason. And if you are a person who, and I think we as a society believe that we have been enriched and empowered by expertise and neutrality and agencies that don't serve at the pleasure of the president, this is an earthquake of a decision.
Can you take it in two different pieces? One is the logic. It does seem to obliterate checks and balances. If these agencies are funded by Congress and Congress has the approval to, confirm people, to override that seems to remove Congress's power to check the executive. How does the Supreme Court work its way around that?
I mean, one of the things that's really deeply discomforting about this case is the court engages in a lot of really bad history to get there. They essentially go back and kind of reverse engineer American history to say it was always, the case that the president was supposed to have this very, very broad authority over agencies, and that, we're just kind of rediscovering this power that should never have been seated in the first instance. And like, I really want to be clear, the history is bad. There are tremendous, tremendous legal scholars who have done the work to say this is not, in fact, the case. But that's how the court gets there. They kind of, as they often do, using this sort of faux originalism, they pull it out of a manufactured past. But I think the deeper thing you're asking, and it really is the worry here, is that we keep complaining about, Congress doesn't do anything. We have this supine, useless Congress who, never legislates and never does anything. And I think one of the things to pull from this case, Jessica, is that Congress actually does legislate. Congress actually does act as a check on the president. And then we have these independent agencies that are also supposed to act as some kind of braking mechanism. And this is the court essentially substituting its judgment, right? That there need be no checks. In other words, this is the court disempowering Congress and empowering, in effect, creating an imperial presidency, and doing that by way of being an imperial court. So what's really deeply frightening about this is, in some sense, it sounds in the key of that presidential immunity decision, where the court essentially says, the president's power is to the maximalist outer bounds of what we could contemplate presidential power being. It has ever been thus. And in so doing, disempowers Congress in ways that Congress can't recover from.
I mean, one thinks of, it's hard to imagine like a sort of legalistic coup or a judicial, how we would have a calm coup in this country. This feels like it's in that vein. Does that sound insane for me to say that, use that word?
No, and I think it's really, the subtle point here is that we keep talking about, Trump and MAGA, and, this is an unconstrained presidency that doesn't hear no. And I think you're exactly right to say the court is putting that on rocket fuel, right?
Yeah.
And one other piece of this that's worth flagging, I mean, the court just absolutely recklessly overturns this case, Humphrey's Executor. It's a case from the 1930s, by the way, about an FTC commissioner that was fired without cause. The court said you can't. The court just wipes that off the books today with no real regard for the fact that this is longstanding precedent. And I think this is the other piece of it. It essentially says, it's we're not just overturning precedent. They already did this on the so-called shadow docket, right? This is the cases that don't get, with all sorts of fanfare and spectacle in the last 2 weeks of June. This gets decided, in the middle of the night, in a couple. The court just decided it in an emergency posture. So in the very strangest sense, the court doesn't just overturn this case, Humphrey's Executor. Emphatically, no, the president doesn't have the power to do this, but the court more or less looks back and says, oh, we already kind of did this in secret. And so what makes the language of coup really, really salient here for me is that this is the court doing the one thing it has to do, which is follow precedent. Nope. Follow, the dictates of the Congress and the statutes. Nope. And then say, oh, it's ever been thus. This is what history and text dictates.
It's a gaslight.
And also, we did it in the middle of the night. It's a huge gaslight. And it will, I think this is the thing that's chilling. It will have knock-on effects for every independent agency going forward that will take a generation, if that, for us to unroll.
So I want to hit on one more point on this, which is what you just said. Can you give some concrete examples of what could flow from this? Could, for example, somebody be fired from the EPA for acknowledging that human impact contributes to climate change? Big and small, how could this impact our regulatory apparatus?
I mean, it's essentially every, think of the CDC, right? Think of the EPA, think of every agency that, again, by the way, this is of a piece with actions that the court have taken, right? We remember just a couple of years ago, the court said we don't have to defer to remember, like in the Chevron deference case, we don't have to defer to agencies' interpretation of their own, statutes. I mean, this is of a piece with forever further constraining regulatory agencies' ability to do the work that they have to do. And again, the notion that, it's all political and they all serve at the pleasure of the president means exactly what you say it means, which is the environment is what the president says, right? Public health is what the president says. Every, uh, uh, you know, way we do air and space and particulate matter is what the president says. And if you live in a science-based, expertise-based world where you and I think still currently reside, the idea that that can all be, sort of wiped off the books because the president says he wants people who agree with him is anathema to how we can possibly regulate around really intractable, thorny problems.
It's just such a hard one to move past. I think we should acknowledge that you mentioned this, the court carved out one exception for the Fed that said that the president cannot fire Lisa Cook, who is on the board of the Fed, and that somehow that's uniquely protected. Can you just give me your sort of more political analysis? Is this an extension of like the Powell memo from the 70s where American government has to be redesigned to protect corporatism? Like how do you make sense of this?
There's almost no making sense of this. I mean, when the court handled all this on the shadow docket, they actually had the same carve out. They said, this is true for everything but the Fed because it's got a unique historical structure, which means that it is not subject to this analysis. And essentially, we got the same thing today, while the Rebecca Slaughter FTC case was 6-3, right? Saying, she's gone by a 5-4 margin, written by the same Chief Justice, John Roberts, who wrote the Slaughter case and the Lisa Cook case, then writes, but the Fed is different. And so Lisa Cook is protected, at least in the near term, while this case percolates, that she didn't have adequate process. And I wish I could give you a complicated political read for this. It doesn't even feel to me that the Chief Justice took the time to say, like, with gravitas and sobriety, the Fed is different because, the same sort of mealy mouth, the Fed is just different. But I put this, I mean, you're exactly right to like harken back to the Chamber of Commerce and the Powell memo where, as long as it's our pocketbook, it's different. I also put it in the bucket with the tariffs case, right, Jessica? This is the only other resounding no that Donald Trump has had. And it feels, pardon my cynicism, but it really feels as though the red line beyond which John Roberts and the supermajority conservative justices will not trammel is it going to affect, my retirement savings and my kids' college fund? Because it is almost indistinguishable. And as I said, there's not a tremendous amount of effort that goes into distinguishing. It's just somehow Lisa Cook and, by analogy, Jerome Powell, that's different.
There were two decisions that I was surprised by pleasantly. One was they did not accept Trump's challenge to the E. Jean Carroll case and the settlement, so Trump has to pay the $5 million in that. And then the mail-in ballots. This one I'd love you to comment on. They found that states may continue to count mail-in ballots that arrive on election day, but are not counted until after. Is that promising sign that they are going to uphold election laws, or was there something particular to this?
I mean, in some sense, this is an easy case. The fact that it comes down 5-4 should alarm us all.
Got
This should have been 9-0.
yeah.
This is, a whole bunch of states. Over half the states have laws that say if your ballot is postmarked by election day and it comes in within some safe haven through no fault of your own, we will still count it. And this was an effort to override that and say, we're simply not counting mail-in ballots and absentee ballots that come in after election day. So in some sense, this was an easy case. If you think about it in the simplest terms, states have absolute prerogative, complete prerogative to determine how elections go, right? And the federal government has nothing to say about this. So this should have been a 9-0 case, and it's a statutory case. The reason it's a little bit worrying, in addition to the fact that we had 4 justices who apparently were like, no, this is a really thorny, tricky case. But Justice Alito writes this I'm trying to think of the legal word, and I just want to say hinky dissent, where he's using the very scary language of the denialism that we heard around the 2020 election, that any ballot that comes in after election day itself is somehow in question, and that all of this, like allowing ballots to come in late, raises public doubts about the sanctity and integrity of election. I mean, this really feels like somebody who was watching, all of that election denialist news in 2020. And so while it's emphatically, indisputably good news that the court is very, very clear, again, by a 5-4 margin, if you are in a state that allows ballots that are postmarked day of and come in within the window, your ballot will be counted. No dispute, that is good news. That there were 4 votes that think there's anything wrong with that, or that take this very, very, right-wing data point that there's something suspect about counting votes. Like, think of states like California, right, where it just takes days to count ballots. People use, vote by mail, and it takes a while. There's nothing destabilizing. There's no, blue mirage there. There's just, that is how we do it. And so what scares me about this result is it feels like it is sort of sowing doubt and questions. And if you put that in the larger context of the fight we're having around the SAVE Act, the fight we're having around the post office right now, it feels like for 4 justices to be making claims that are utterly untrue about the legitimacy of votes that come in by mail strikes me as a harbinger of something very, very, very dangerous if the court gets any kind of close election. Sorry, Jesus, it is.
I know. I mean, especially when you put it together with what they've just done to empower the executive, it makes you wonder whether conservatives think there will not be a Democrat in that office again for a long time, where they want to make sure that's the case. I sound like a crazy conspiracy theorist, but these days you have to start thinking that way.
I think I need to be very clear that when your polling numbers are where the GOP's polling numbers are, where Donald Trump's polling numbers are, where it is very, very manifestly possible that the thing that was unimaginable 6 months ago could lose the House, could lose the Senate. This could really be a shockwave election. And that the only response to that is, in that case, we need to call the election results into doubt even before election day, which really is a replay, right, of the 2020 election. I mean, it's not a conspiracy theory if it's in fact the only play that I can see that is a plausible play right now. And so
Mhm.
I don't hear what you're saying as deranged. I hear what you're saying as, and this is why, these new efforts to get voter rolls and to purge voter rolls and get the states to turn it, and for the postmaster general to be testifying, like, we're not going to send out mail in ballots if your name is on a list. Like, this is all part of a very, very concerted effort to say, no matter what happens in the midterms, we're going to say it was stolen. And this would be, again, less conspiratorial and freaky had it not happened once already.
Mhm. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the court agreed to hear a case about purging names off of voter rolls. Is that correct?
They did take an election case today. I want to be careful because I'm not sure that I saw what it was, but they did take
Okay, we'll get into it.
what is going to be another signature election case. And again, it's, I think, worth pointing out that this is the court. If you think about the 20 election. This is the same court that overwhelmingly batted away all of these very, very Hail Mary, unjustified suits that were coming up, sort of trying to find fraud and trying to find ways to set aside the election results. And this court, in addition to lower courts around the country, had no patience for that kind of effort. And so the idea that now we're suddenly in a squeaker on these
It's just so
questions,
bizarre
it's
how they can
bizarre.
justify it. I had promised to take not more of your time than I've already taken. I would love for you to tell us what's yet to come.
So tomorrow's the last day of the term. Thank God, because this has
You can
been
sleep for a month, hopefully. Yeah.
this past 2 weeks has been a million years. So there's 4 cases that are going to come down. There's one about campaign finance that may really put the sort of last nail in the coffin for trying to keep big money out of politics. There are 2 cases about transgender athletes playing in sports that I do not think are going to go well for the trans athletes based on the court's performance at oral arguments. And then probably the biggest case of the year, Jessica, is this birthright citizenship case, which is the president, by executive fiat, by way of a executive order at the very beginning of his second presidency, saying, I don't care what the 14th Amendment says about birthright citizenship, I'm going to strip it for anybody whose parents were either here, on a temporary status or illegally, which would be just the most profound sea change in questions of who gets to be an American. And so that's the big ticket case. And this is, in a couple of weeks of a lot of big ticket cases. Those are the 4 that come down tomorrow. And I guess I would just maybe end by saying, I worry a little bit in the context of, we had a couple of devastating cases just last week about temporary protective status, right? Haitian
Yeah.
and Syrian refugees who are going to be, summarily sent back, how it's become almost impossible for asylum seekers to seek asylum. Like, this has been just a devastating, devastating term for real human beings with real, consequences on the line from this court. And so I just want to caution people that if it turns out, and I think it will, that you can't get 5 votes tomorrow. I don't think we're going to get 5 votes to end birthright citizenship. By all that is holy, like, don't let the narrative be, oh, look at that centrist Roberts Court
Right.
doing the right thing, because they've done so much profound harm in the last couple of weeks. And I think we have to reckon with that.
Well, I don't really see much of a silver lining, except that Dahlia Lithwick said I'm not deranged. So that's my win for the day. I wish we had better news to talk about, but I'm so grateful to you for really giving us the perspective we need to understand. What's beautiful about the way you communicate this is you not only explain what the court does, but the impact on real human beings, which is where so much of this gets lost. So thank you. Somebody wrote in saying, can they bring a case to undo all of these things? Well, sure, but you need a different court.
And I would just say, and this is really, really important, and let's like end on a note of empowerment and not, I worry about the sort of learned helplessness
Yes,
of,
agreed.
we're stuck with this court. Congress could pass a law tomorrow, to reinstantiate, the independence of agency heads. Congress can pass a law tomorrow to bolster elections. So I think we have to not only think very, very, very seriously about Supreme Court reform, structural reform, term limits, and real ethics, and jurisdiction stripping, and all the things we're afraid to talk about in terms of the court, Jessica. But I also think we have to start to really, really ask ourselves, like, if we don't agree with the premise that an imperial court creates an imperial presidency and the rest of us just watch, then we have to figure out ways to re-empower both a court that answers to us and a Congress that does the work. And I don't think those things are impossible. And I also don't think this is the first time in American history we've had to think about that. But I do believe deeply, deeply, deeply that we have to not just say, I'm going to vote in November. We have to really think about structural government reform right now.
Really, really thoughtful words, Dahlia. Thank you for ending us on a positive note. To everybody, you're welcome. Thank you. I'm lucky she said yes, and you're welcome. We got to hear from her today, and I will make sure that you have a link to her podcast. You can listen to her podcast and to her books. You can buy her most recent book. Check her out always on Slater and wherever else she's published. Dahlia, please come back whenever the spirit moves you.
It's always a treat to be with you. Really thank you for everything you do, Jessica.
Thank you. Thank you. And to everybody here, we'll send this out in the newsletter and put it all over socially so you can find it again. We'll be in your inbox later today. Have a good one, everyone.